Hi everybody, this is Rob Darrow from INACOL. We're glad you're here for our webinar today entitled The Role of Leadership in the Implementation of Successful Blended Learning Programs. You can see all of our speakers listed there on the screen, and we will hear from all of them in just a minute. As we go through the webinar, if you have questions, feel free to type them in the chat room. There are designated times for questions at the end, but of course it's fun to allow the speakers to answer questions if you have some as we're going through. So just a little quick review of blended learning. When we talk about blended learning from the INACOL perspective, we use the Horn and Staker definition, which is that blended learning is a formal education program in which a student learns at least in part through online delivery of content instruction with some element of student control over time, place, path, and or pace, and in part at a supervised brick and mortar location away from home. We know that that's the definition, and we know that all schools and programs are in different stages of that, and some work at different levels than others, which is fine, and that's part of the reason for the webinar today. We want to be clear that being a technology-rich classroom does not mean that it's blended. For example, just having a teacher on a digital whiteboard with students on computers does not make it a blended learning classroom. There's a lot more that goes into it, and you'll hear a little bit of that from the speakers today. We also want to keep in focus that when we talk about blended learning or online learning or face-to-face learning, there are three big components here. We've got the student, we've got the teacher, and the content, and how all of those things fit together is what translates to teaching and learning. So our webinar focus today is really on the leadership and how to implement these blended learning programs. So I wanted to just give that context of blended learning so we could move forward to hear from each of our speakers. I think what I'd like to do is just have each speaker introduce themselves, and then we'll start with Carrie Matsuoka from the Milpitas Unified School District. So as you see your name listed there, that would be, let's hear from Carrie first, then Rachel, then Eileen, then Jackie. If you would each take a minute to introduce yourselves, and then I'll advance the slide, and then Carrie can do his part, and we'll go from there.
All right, good morning or good afternoon, depending where you're at. This is Carrie Matsuoka, Superintendent in Milpitas Unified, and I've been in this district as superintendent for 2 years plus, and we are located essentially on the edge of Silicon Valley over in the Bay Area, so we're fortunate to live and work in the center of a lot of innovation. And next, I'm supposed to introduce Rachel Goodwin, who is working in the Chicago Virtual Charter School.
Hi, and thank you, Carrie. My name is Rachel Goodwin, and I work for Chicago Virtual Charter School, which it means that it is a charter school under CPS, which is Chicago Public Schools. They are our charter authorizer, but K-12, which is probably known by many, they provide the curriculum and the management services to the schools. So we're the only hybrid type model here in Chicago, and I'm happy to be here today. Thank you. And next will be Eileen.
Hi, this is Eileen Marks, and I am an implementation manager in New York City Public Schools, and I work for iLearn NYC. And I help principals in schools make a plan for implementing online and blended learning. And I can't see who's next. I'm sorry.
Hi, good afternoon and good morning, everyone. My name is Jackie Levine. I'm the Director of Professional Learning for iLearn NYC in the New York City Department of Education. We are currently overseeing 260 schools throughout every borough, Brooklyn, Queens, Manhattan, Staten Island, and the Bronx. And we are excited to be on the call today to tell you about our implementation on the district level.
So Carrie, I'll turn it over to you to talk about the Milpitas Unified.
Should I pass it back?
Okay, as you can see on the map where Milpitas is located, so we are at the south end of the San Francisco Bay, and it's just a great place to live and to work. Next slide. So Milpitas Unified, we're a mainstream public school district, K-12. We have 10,000 kids. And as I looked at the questions that Rob asked us to respond to, first of all, we started our blended learning in the 12-13 school year, so that was last year. And the question of why, I decided to answer with a really large lens on it. Schools are still operating from an industrial factory model. It was built, actually was designed during the 1910s and 20s. The idea of one size fits all, that we can sequentially run students through our school system on the same time pace and delivery. It really is completely opposite of differentiated instruction and personalized learning. So as I looked at what was happening out in the space, I saw blended learning as offering the possibility of creating a customized learning environment for students. So that was the big reason for the change. Rob, are you controlling the slides or can I control them? You're probably controlling.
If you click on the right or left arrows, you're welcome.
So how we got started?
Go ahead.
Okay. Thank you. How we got started was I posed a single question mostly to our principals, and this was in the winter of 2012. The question was, if you could design a school of the future, what would it look like? And I just let that question sit out in our district for a couple months. We did provide some design guidelines. It wasn't a free-for-all. And we really applied design thinking principles with our school leaders, with our teachers, and we invited them to design that school of the future. And so in 2012, that spring conversation led to 2 full K-6 blended learning schools that started 3 months later, which was super fast, hard to do, but I'm glad that we pushed that fast. And just as a side note, we ran another design cycle in the spring of 2013, and I see this now becoming an embedded routine in our school district, where every spring we continue the design cycle. So I'm going to speak less about our program structure. I think our other 2 presenters will dive into the models of blended learning. I think what people I find are very interested in is what is the role of leadership in bringing blended learning. It's really about how do you create these paradigm shifts. So I'm going to focus on, I would call it the change management steps that leaders have to do. One of the principles that I've been provided with by some experts is learning how to communicate with concentric circles. And if you could visualize a series of rings, who needs to hear about this first? Well, obviously the governing board, but then very close after that is the management team. And I included the teacher union leaders very early in this design process. And then we move out further to school staff and eventually to our parents, and then ultimately the entire community through the media. And the reason why I found this so helpful and important is if you don't communicate broadly, your opponents will shoot you down. The parking lot conversations will undermine the effort. And so I've learned to communicate broadly and systematically about bringing change initiatives. It has been super helpful. So implementation, last year was 2012-13. We had 2 elementary schools that went full school blended learning, and it was a rotational model. And then, unbeknownst to me, one of my preschools developed a blended learning model without much knowledge and input from myself and staff. And lo and behold, we have a preschool doing blended learning rotations within a preschool setting. This year, the 3 schools are continuing on, and by my measure, we have blended learning expanding to 7 other schools. So right now, we have 9 out of 14 schools that are using some form of blended learning. So the role of the leader, you've got to create a vision and answer that question of why, and to present a need for a paradigm shift, and shifts are big. I also found it important to use the principle of defined autonomy. And I let these school-based teams design their plans, their models, and my job at the cabinet level, superintendent level, was to provide support, but also boundaries. You've got to get the infrastructure right. If the hardware, software, and wireless doesn't work, blended learning has no chance. And so we've been working hard on that end. And from my experience, get ready for lots of problem solving and lots of meetings, because you will be, it's like you're running a startup inside of a school district. Some tips on getting started, at least from our experience. I asked our leaders to read and to understand the vision of a different paradigm of running schools. We did as many field trips as we could in the local Bay Area. Visit other schools and other districts who are starting to do blended learning. It's really important to find models out there, because the stuff is so new, teachers would be very hesitant to make the change. But when they see another colleague, perhaps in another district, and now we're fortunate within our district, it helps them make the shift to a different way of teaching and learning. And we all have to network and learn, because this is very new work. There's not a lot of research and literature out there. And some last comments. I believe Common Core and blended learning are very complementary. Our blended learning schools, our teachers, our students will be very well prepared to navigate the Common Core experience. My other advice, go open source as much as possible. We've adopted Google Tools, Gmail, and Chromebooks as our primary standards. And it goes without saying, if you're going to step into the space, you have to be willing to risk. So that's my overview from a superintendent's perspective about how to lead a school district into the blended learning space.
One question, Carrie, you talked about setting the standards. Could you go back to that slide where you talked about standards for open source and the different technologies? Could you talk a little bit about how you came to choose that as a standard and why you think having some sort of standard across your district is important?
Yes, that bullet point refers to the technology infrastructure, and my technology team, they spent a good year studying the options out there. And we decided to go with Google, and the Chromebook has been a very successful platform. And I'll give you an example. We're at 3,500 Chromebooks and rising. And my director of technology can centrally manage that from his laptop computer. So when you start scaling up devices, standardization is a big challenge. So that was really an important reason to go with the Chromebook and Google.
Great. Are there other questions for Carrie in the Milpitas Unified School District at this point before we go on? Great, and I would ask some of you who are on the phone, if you put your phones on mute when you're not speaking, then we don't hear you eating your potato chips and things like that. So with that, I'll advance the slides and introduce you to Rachel from Chicago Virtual Charter School. Thanks.
Hi. Rob, I didn't know, there's someone that wrote something in the chat box. I don't know if Carrie wants to answer that question, or are we going to answer that at the end?
Good point. I just saw that. Carrie, you want to respond to that about writing the curriculum and how that's developing?
So in the blended learning schools, what you're trying to find is software that will support the work of teachers who are doing the direct instruction, and we're using Chromebooks and software, and not to supplement instruction, but to provide a major tool for teachers. So really, when you say write curriculum, it's about finding the best software providers who will support learning in we're focused on math and English language arts. So last year our math software provider was, what's the name of the parent company? The software is GG Math. SP Math is the parent company. And very good software, a little hard to integrate into instruction. And then on ELA we used Compass Learning last year with mixed results. So this year we are using iReady, which has been driven by Curriculum Associates. And so we're giving iReady a real strong test run in our district, and that's being used across 11 schools right now.
All right. Again, my name is Rachel Goodwin, and I am from Chicago Virtual Charter School. I am the K-8 academic administrator. We are a K-12 school, but there is another administrator that oversees the high school curriculum. Just a little bit of myself. I have a master's in elementary ed, and right now finishing up my master's in administration and leadership. And have solely been working in charter schools. Right when I got out of college, I went right into teaching into charter schools and then worked there for about 10 years until moving into more of a hybrid type of environment for the past 6 years. And so I've really seen our program change and evolved in the past 6 years, and I actually have learned a lot through that process too, as this was very new to me when I came into and be part of the leadership team. So just a little bit about Chicago Virtual Charter School. Again, it is a K-12 school. Currently we have about 651 students. Our cap has been increased to 680. The students that do attend our school need to live in the Chicago city limits. Since we are a public school, obviously all students are welcomed. They don't have any kind of selective enrollment process here. And being part of the charter school network, there is some flexibility in the structure and how we manage our school here, even though Chicago Public School is our charter authorizer. And then you can see a majority of the individuals that we serviced is African American. That's the majority right over here. Our next group would be actually the white or Caucasian individuals, according to obviously information that the parents provide to us. So when and why? So basically, Chicago Virtual Charter School is managed by K-12, which is an educational management company and curriculum provider. They want to start a virtual school in Chicago, but there were certain Illinois restrictions that wouldn't allow us to be completely virtual, which led to the creation of a hybrid school. So we are the only hybrid school here in the city of Chicago. And after the state approved us, then the board, our school board and K-12 worked with CPS to get our application accepted and approved. And I will admit at the beginning it was a very tough sell to the CPS board, and also just we actually, I think in our 3rd year of existence, we had actually a lawsuit. The Chicago Teacher Union put a lawsuit against our school because of the model, and obviously we won that particular battle since we are still in existence, and we finally, it's starting to be accepted more in the city of Chicago and within CPS. We are, like I said, we worked with the board, K-12 worked with the board to have a vision to provide state-of-the-art curriculum and create an environment where students can learn at their own pace. So we opened up our doors in 2006, and happy to say that we are still here. We have moved physical locations, but we're still in this center of the city. So one of the questions that Rob asked me to answer was, what are some of the things that we focused on, at the beginning and then where we are currently. So like I said before, there was a lot of challenges and obstacles in the beginning. I can't speak too much initially what was focused on since I wasn't part of the school from its inception. I did join CVCS about 1.5 years later as their student services administrator. And when I joined, the school team, or leadership team, really focused on developing relationships with the school community, the parents, the students, the teachers, and CPS, for obvious reasons, right? Because it was very new to have a hybrid environment here in the city. So we really wanted to create those positive relationships and get the information and have them have a good understanding of what this model consists of. And I would also say the next thing was identifying the right teachers to work in a blended environment, which is really essential when working with such a model. So I was in charge of hiring, as a student services administrator, I had developed the advanced learning program, the SPED department, ELL, which is essential to get the right individuals to support the hybrid model, and then in addition to that, know how to develop programs in a hybrid model for those specific group of students. And I would say after the leadership team, got the right teachers in place, we really then worked on, because there's lots of flexibility within our program, we wanted to make sure everyone and ensure everyone was accountable for the goals and expectations that needed to be met. So in order for us to do that, we had to address what was our direction of the school, what was our mission. So I would say that would be the next part of the implementation process, was to look at what specifically was our mission. And we worked with our teachers, our parents, and board members, and it was a week kind of retreat over the summer where we invited all the stakeholders to talk about where we want the school to go, what did we want to become. And once we've created that, we moved on developing goals that would support our mission and developing a strategic plan. Here at this school, not all K-12 schools have this, but here at Chicago Virtual, we actually adopted the balanced scorecard approach. I don't know if people are familiar with that, but that is a strategic planning and management system that many businesses and industries and government organizations use to align their business activities to the vision and strategy of the organization, because they want to improve the internal and external communication and monitor how their organization is working and performing against those strategic goals. It was originated by two Harvard gurus, and we decided to adopt that particular approach. And so we developed our mission, our vision, and then identified particular stakeholders, and then created what our specific goals were, and then putting measures in place to determine if we were meeting those goals, and then being transparent with the school community on what we were doing and what direction we were heading, which I believe when we took that approach, it really helped us create a more positive culture and brought the knowledge that is needed to be part of this type of community. Again, because it's not, I don't think people have enough information on blended learning and hybrid learning, so they only hear what they want to hear. But once we start really effectively communicating what that consists of and what we're doing as a school, I believe this plan, this public plan that we made, really brought the school in a more positive light. So from this exercise, I have to say, going through all those steps, we had many reflective conversations that several things came out of it, such as how we approach PDs for our teachers, what type of parental workshops to support our parents being part of this environment and new way of teaching, and also our evaluation and system and teacher bonus breakdown. To support this type of direction with all our stakeholders. Again, I think I've listed that before previously, but it's constant communication of where we're at, where we're going, the data that's showing how we're performing against our strategic objectives, making sure objectives are clear, that everyone from the parapros all the way to, the head of school are understanding what objectives we need to have to place, what we need to focus on, because when you implement such a model, there's so many things you can focus on, so many things you want to do well, but we made a 5-year plan, so we are building on those objectives and adding to those as giving us more time and and clarity to where we need to go based on particular data that we're also receiving from the programs that we're using, feedback from our parents, and so forth. And like I mentioned before, a lot of reviewing of the data and providing that data to all our stakeholders. Think that it's not we're trying to hide anything. Some things are working and some things are not, right? And if we decide to change something in our model, we always making sure that we're making that decision because of X, Y, and Z. So where we are now. So right now we're doing well in the sense that we are outperforming particular neighborhood schools. Every year we're increasing our state assessment scores. And because of that, we have been granted the authority or the right to be able to increase our student cap. And now we have a complete K-12 school, which is very exciting. Many graduations. And where we're going, well, I mean, our vision is to become the best hybrid school. So we continually, every year, are trying to find ways to become one of the best. Sorry there, I just got kicked off. I just lost my train of thought. So yes, so improving support programs, and one of the things that we've implemented, I know that Gary talked about Odyssey. We did use Odyssey for a couple of years. We now moved to Dreambox. And then we're also using other programs like Learning A to Z, things like that, and incorporating it with, and Study Island, for example, to incorporate that with the curriculum that we have with K-12. And also using data more effectively to drive our instruction and support. So we now have weekly data meetings with our teachers, about a half hour to kind of check in to see how they're doing, how the students are doing with the curriculum. Also looking at RTI, response intervention data to see how students are, responding to interventions and what other things we need to do in our support programs to help those students that are struggling. And also, I believe where we're going is providing better PD for our teachers and training for our teachers. And Rob, I don't think I am a moderator, so I can't move to the next slide. Thank you. All right, so what it looks like. I know I mentioned, you probably have heard me say several times we're a hybrid school, so how does that fit in the continuum of blended learning? It's just a type of blended learning. I don't know, it seems as though some of the other presenters here today, a lot of their blended learning is they actually are in a physical building. We only have our students come to physically to a building 1 day a week, and we call that the Learning Center. So the students come 1 day a week to the Learning Center. The rest of the time they are working with their homeroom teacher virtually. So a lot of independent work, but then we also work with them using actually this particular tool that we're on right now, the Blackboard Collaborate, to instruct our students virtually in leveled group sessions twice a week. And then for those students who are, having particular deficiencies or need additional support, then we have individual or small group virtual sessions that focus on the curriculum and those interventions. And we really worked with our families to find out what are good times for us to be working together with them. So every teacher has a very different schedule. And then in addition to them working with the homeroom teacher, students who are behind actually also receive virtual support and face-to-face support by their academic support teachers here. And with all of that, it kind of provides some flexibility on the curriculum that they're using. So we really look at the students' strengths and weaknesses to determine what's the best course the students should be in. At the same time, though, we are always continually exposing them to grade level standards through more project-based learning. So we do a lot of project-based learning here physically in the building, which supports, it helps differentiate, I believe, and make it really interactive for our students when they're here physically in the building. But our students, when they do come here, we could have a 5th grade class, and some students might be in a level below in the curriculum, some might be in a level above, or even 2 levels above. So it's there's a wide variety of levels when they come to their Learning Center session. But when they work virtually, that's more specifically on where they are instructionally. So key aspects in implementing hybrid or blended learning. I think it's effective. Being an effective communicator, you need to have a strong mission, and everyone needs to be driven by that mission and always looking at whatever changes you're going to do, is it supporting the mission? Also, being able to develop relationships with all stakeholders is really essential. Like Carrie said, being a risk taker. This is really new. It's still in its baby stages. So being positive and having enough confidence to try things based on the data and based on feedback and things like that, to try something, but being open to fail, but being proactive. So when you start seeing things that are not going what you plan it to be able to react right away and know what direction you need to do or what changes you need to make. And then I believe it's being an advocate. Because this is new, it's sending that information out, advocating for this type of model, and showing how it can be successful and it can work to those naysayers, so to speak. And I'll answer all the questions I see in the chat box in a few moments. I don't want you to believe that I am ignoring you. I see them. I'll get to them after I finish all of this. So the other thing Rob asked was, there are some daily, monthly leadership activities that we take. We do weekly staff meetings, and during that staff meetings, there are 3 parts to those. It's an hour and a half, and basically within that hour and a half, we do review the school data, we go over school operations, and then there's always at least 20 minutes, 30 to 20 minutes of instructional PD. So we actually are using the book Teach Like a Champion, and we take particular strategies and we talk about how can we implement that in our particular environment, virtually and face-to-face. We also have monthly PDs, so I'm in charge of creating the PD calendar. So I have a year, I always plan the PD in May the year before for the upcoming school year by doing a needs assessment with my staff, looking at our data, seeing what are some things that we need to work on. And based on those 3 points, that create a monthly PD schedule for our staff. And within that PD, it's always presenting current research, scaffolding, instructional approaches, again, always reviewing data, and then also providing enough time for reflective conversations. I think it's really important, again, in our environment, that when we try something, that we allow teachers enough time to be able to try it out, reflect, come back, to be able to discuss it, reflect on it, and scaffolding those particular techniques. Also, I have a one-on-one meeting with every single teacher from K to 8, and also any SPED teacher or support staff that support our students. So I have a weekly meeting with every single teacher. It's really a check-in. Sometimes there are particular data I might bring in, for example, how students are performing in Study Island, or looking at their online curriculum and seeing, if kids are failing numerous times a particular assessment. I then talk about that in our meeting. And also, I think part of my monthly activities is doing formal and informal observations. So I see them in class. I also watch their virtual sessions. Luckily, they're recording because I watch a lot of those in the evening. And then providing continual feedback on that. And then also we provide 2 evaluations, one at the first semester, one the second semester. But we have almost twice a month. I'm doing observations with my teachers. Promising practices in our model, I think our data meetings. ILSPs, we have an individual learning success plan for every single student. So looking at their, their interest, also looking at their strengths and weaknesses, looking at their data. We then create specific goals for each individual student, but also for their parents. We sit down with their parents and we have them create goals also, because it's important, I think, in a blended or hybrid environment. We're all in partnership. We all need to be working together to be able to support the student. We do check-in meetings, and also the PDs, I feel, is a promising practice. Some things that I've learned for the past 6 years being here, being transparent is really important. Having a clear direction, understanding your student body. When we first started, it was a majority were homeschool parents, and then now currently we have a small percentage that are homeschool parents. It's more urban families who just don't feel like they were successful in the public school system, and they want to try this particular model to help their students. So and we have an increase of SPEDS population, so our student body has really changed, which has really affected the way we do instruction and what type of programs we have in place and resources too. And then providing quality PD and training for the staff. It was a lesson learned. You can't assume anything. So we always make sure that we are providing all the training and PD and resources, or even sending our staff out to look and evaluate what other people are doing too. I believe that is it. I know I spoke a lot. Oh, recommendations for you guys. Having high expectations, developing a plan, listening to your students and teachers, working as a team is essential, willing to be reflective and change when it's not working, and using data effectively are my recommendations for individuals that are looking into developing or incorporating a blended type model in their schools. And that is it for me. I'm so sorry if I spoke over my time allotted, Rob.
So Rachel, maybe two questions you could answer quickly. One was Eric asked early on about the right teacher. How do you identify the right teachers for your school? What was that process like? And then perhaps the other question you could answer would be the models that you researched that came up with your particular model. So if you just answer those two questions and then turn it over to Jackie and Eileen, that would be great.
Sure. Picking the right teachers, it was, first of all, I think it's just how they answer. We have particular questions that we ask, and from their responses, we kind of give a good idea of what teachers work best in this particular model. And in addition to that, I even have our teachers, or those prospective teachers, meet me online, and I have them teach a class. So I give them a particular scenario, I say just have fun with it, and I like to see how they incorporate technology, but most importantly, how they engage with students, and having to do something totally new and out of the box, and see how they run with it. And that has been, I found, to be the successful formula for us, honestly, over here. We have picked some great individuals, and our teacher retention is, gosh, I think we have, since I've been here, we've had maybe 3 teachers leave, and they all left because one moved to Paris because her husband was transferred there, and 2 others actually decided to go into different careers. So the formula, I really think, is their attitude towards the blended model, and I'd like to ask them what challenges you foresee, and hearing what they are, their responses to those type of questions really give me a good insight whether they would fit well as a teacher here. And then the last one, I'm sorry, was the models that I research. The reason why we picked hybrid, honestly, it was because the state told us that in order for us to open up any type of virtual school, there had to be a particular number of minutes allotted to face-to-face direct instruction. So, poof, that became the model of hybrid. So that's the reason why we have students come here 1 day a week, and we work with them the rest of the time virtually. but it seemed to be a model that's working for us.
Okay.
Thanks, Rachel. I appreciate that. I just realized we're going from west to east here, so now we're heading into New York City Public Schools to Jackie and Eileen.
Thank you, Rob. Hi, everyone. This is Jackie speaking. I wanted to give you guys a brief history of iLearn NYC. We started in August of 2010. We started with a pilot of 12 schools that really wanted to do work around innovation and really reimagining what schools could look like. And from that pilot, we added about 24 more schools. We had about 40 schools in our first year, 2010, 2011, and that was broken up into 3 categories. We had the 12 blended. Some were advanced placement schools and others were credit recovery. And so we had predetermined categories for the schools to function and work within. During that time, we had 3 implementation managers, and so the program shifted in that we expanded more schools, but we also developed our online platform, which is really what our program is based upon. We have an iLearn NYC platform that is built off of Desire to Learn, and it integrates 15 different content providers. So we have 16 different content providers if you consider Desire to Learn as one of the 16. In our first year, we started out with 5 vendors, and those were Apex, PowerSpeak, Compass, Aventa, and Conspiracy Code, and then we grew out to include 10 more. And so with the 124 schools, we definitely felt the need to bring on more implementation managers as well. The shift changed from supporting schools from a technical aspect to an instructional aspect. So we really needed to have the program be grounded in instruction and really develop what blended learning was. When we first started, we thought it would have been an online program, but we saw that our schools were not really adopting the online work as quickly as we wanted, and so we definitely shifted towards the approach. With that, last year we moved to 196 schools, and we hired more implementation managers. I think we had a total of 10 implementation managers last year. And what we developed, which we'll talk about in detail later on, is a lab school model. What schools expressed to us is that they love the professional development being offered on a citywide level, which was largely around the content providers. They didn't necessarily like our webinars because this, once again, is just really the paradigm shift that Carrie spoke about. But they really wanted to learn from each other. And so we developed a lab school model where we had 8 model schools who were doing good things around blended learning, and we had schools subscribe to them as cohorts. And this year we have raised to 260 schools, and I think we're down to 7 cohorts. So we'll definitely talk about the implementation as we go through, but I wanted to give you guys just a brief synopsis of how this all evolved and shifted. We do have schools all over the city, and so our implementation managers travel a great deal amongst the 5 boroughs, and we do serve grades 6 through 12. Eileen? Okay, so I'll just continue. I'm not hearing Eileen come on the phone to discuss the slide. But
oh, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Sorry, my microphone's giving me some trouble. So my name is Eileen Marks, and I was a middle school teacher teaching special education in New York City for 5 years before I joined iLearn. And like Jackie said, what we came in to focus on is the instructional approach and pedagogy. So what a lot of the work we do around middle and high schools is using blended and online learning for a variety of purposes, which Jackie did speak a little bit about before: credit recovery, sharing instruction across multiple schools. And we do that currently with a virtual AP program where there are students all over the city who are interested in taking AP courses, but their individual school may not offer that course. So we are facilitating students being able to take those courses through a shared teacher. I think the biggest thing that we do is the third bullet here, which is we're really working around infusing technology into the traditional classroom for differentiated instruction and improved engagement. I know, Carrie, you spoke a lot about that with the Chicago. And then finally, another thing we've added on in the last year or two is supporting students with interrupted education. And we'll quickly go through the slides here. If you want to, Rob, I'm trying to put the slides forward, but it's not working on my end. So if someone, okay, thank you. So I won't read everything on these slides because I know we are, we don't have much time left, but we do have homogeneous and heterogeneous content, and we have different lab models for credit accumulation or credit recovery. Next slide. Okay, yeah. That just gives you a little bit of an idea of how schools are doing this, often in a prescribed period or a PM school. Some schools actually offer this on a Saturday school. Students are able to come into a lab and work with a teacher of record who is a specialized content teacher who coaches them through the course. And you see they're often separated by subject. Now, students are also working on this 24/7. They have access. So similar to the Chicago schools, some of these students are working at home, but they do have that specific content area teacher that is guiding them through this content. Next slide. Okay, somehow that went backwards.
No, this is the same. It says credit accumulation and credit recovery.
Yeah. Rob, can you move it forward? Because I don't have the rights. Okay. So another thing that we just passed by, but you don't have to go back, is that there are models of credit accumulation and credit recovery where there is a lab facilitator, which is a content area teacher, not necessarily, I would say a certified teacher, not necessarily the content teacher who is facilitating a lab. Then you may have students who are taking a variety of subjects. Those students often meet with a content teacher separately face-to-face to get personalized instruction, to talk about goal setting, and et cetera. But in that lab, they have a facilitator who is helping them move through the learning management system. So when we share instruction across multiple schools, it's a self-blended model. And these 4 areas are how we're doing that. It's not just across schools. Sometimes within a school, you would also see a self-blend model, especially with electives and independent study. The biggest place that we're doing a self-blended model across multiple schools, again, would be the advanced placement classes and also world languages. We have a shortage of French offerings, Mandarin offerings, and other offerings in New York City. So I especially have one school that is sharing a French teacher with another school so that their students have more than one language option. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, that's just a picture of AP Spanish and how that happens. You have one teacher of record, and it's going through 3 different schools. You can move on. And then, like I said, this is the biggest, I think, implementation that we've seen across the city, is really trying to help teachers blend in their classrooms by using technology to differentiate instruction and improve engagement. So one of the biggest models we've seen, there are 4, I don't know if you're all familiar with Horn and Staker, but there are 4 models that they've identified as emerging models across the United States and other countries. But the one that we've seen a lot in New York City is the station rotation. Because students do have to come to a brick and mortar building, even though they can work on their online courses out of school, they do have a seat time where they have to be in a brick and mortar building. So the station rotation is the one that we're seeing most often because they're often in a lab once a week. They could be in a lab 3 times a week, or some schools have lab daily. We also have provided many schools with laptop carts so that the station rotation can actually happen within a classroom. So there is a one-to-one computing, and when students are not just working on their own self-paced modules, the teacher can pull them out for small group work, which is often project-based learning. She can pull them out for small lessons, and then she can also do a whole class presentation. Next slide, please. Okay, so I think Jackie's going to take over and talk a little bit about the next topic, which you see here, school teacher perspective on the blended learning journey.
Okay, so I'm going to take this to mean that we're talking about how the program is evolved and really talking about the leadership aspect of the program. When we first started, we had schools that were coming into the program with a willingness to reinvent what education and what their instruction in their schools looked like. Over the years, when blended learning really became defined, we decided that we wanted to bring leaders in to have what we called a leadership visioning summit. And it's really important, as Carrie mentioned earlier, to work through that change management process. And so through that visioning summit, we kind of spoke about the mind shift and the cultural change that needs to happen at the school level, and part of that mind shift was creating a committee that involves the principal, the AP or the instructional lead, as well as the iLearn NYC coordinator and the programmer, and some lead teachers, and have them really sit down and plan for the program and plan and align to the instructional goals, because at the end of the day it really ties down to the goals of the school and the principal's evaluation, as well as the academic expectations of the students. And so we really wanted schools to come to the table with those things in mind, because that would allow them to shape what they wanted the program to look like. And we introduced them to 6 elements of blended learning that are very important and really are driven by the school's leadership. The 6 are proactive and reactive instructional strategies, and so Eileen spoke a lot about the difference between the credit accumulation and the AP work. And what we've noticed over the years is that with the shift in credit accumulation policy, a lot of our schools are looking at blended learning from more of a proactive lens. No longer are they trying to remediate students. They're looking at how can I anticipate the needs of my students and thus further plan for them through a blended learning model. The next is the engaging content experience. And so I spoke about the 15 vendors that we had. When we first started, our teachers and the principals were very vocal about the fact that we had 5 content providers, and that they said that was a lot to manage. And so you can imagine us moving from 5 to 15 and how overwhelming that was. And the reason why we did that is not necessarily to give all of the schools access to all of the content, but really to have them, provide them with a marketplace of content so that they can pick and choose and make the best course possible by using content from different providers. And so since in New York City we have a very long and tedious RFP process, we wanted to kind of circumvent that by having all 15 in the same environment so schools wouldn't have to wait to get access to the content that they needed. And so in order to introduce them to the content, we have our vendor showcase that we invite them to every year. We have the vendors come pretty much like a conference where they're able to go to the exhibit hall and see the vendors there, but also work with them in breakout sessions to really get an idea of what the content does and which content is best suited to their students. And that's all based on the goals that they should have predefined and predetermined coming into the session. The third element is the structured and integrated approach to data collection and measurement. And so we know that everything is definitely driven by data, but we wanted the schools to, through our platform, we have an analytics portal that we're still developing that will allow them to track student data and really start redefining what education looks like. Because in the blended classroom, as we know, is constantly changing. Everything is dynamic, and it really shouldn't look like the same implementation on a daily basis if a teacher is evaluating students and meeting their needs. The fourth is data-driven and student-centered instructional strategies. That really speaks about the classroom management and knowing how to create that dynamic atmosphere on the fly. Evaluation and ongoing improvement. And this is one of the areas that we struggle with, because with the new teacher effectiveness and evaluation measures coming down, our principals are very vocal about evaluating and assessing what a blended classroom looks like. And that's one of the things that we're working with INACOL to hopefully define, as well as other providers, because it looks very different from coming into a traditional classroom. And we've had people from our teacher effectiveness division come in to observe schools that are implementing blended learning and really not understanding what's going on as they're observing. And so that's one of the things that our leaders are really moving towards and really want us to assist them in honing and defining. And the last is online communication tools. So I know that Carrie spoke a lot about using Google Chrome and using the Gmail accounts. And our schools do the same, and we want to keep that as well. We definitely don't want them to think that our platform is the end-all, be-all, because we know that it's not. And in certain instances, a lot of schools have created their own blended learning environments using Gmail and Google Apps. And so we want to kind of incorporate that as well, but also stress the importance of creating collaboration. Do collaborate, as we're doing right now in a classroom, to really create that seamless blended experience. And so taking those 6 elements into consideration, we define blended learning as the point where the face-to-face instruction meets those 6 elements. And we really had leaders wrap their minds, or at least try to wrap their minds around what that could look like, and then plan for the year ahead in terms of really developing their school committee, defining their goals, and just knowing what each month of the year would look like in terms of its implementation. And so, Eileen, do you have anything to add in terms of the teacher perspective on the ground level? I think Eileen fell off. Okay.
Oh, can you hear me now? Hi.
Yeah, I can hear you now.
So from a teacher perspective, I think I've seen the most successful teachers who are able to thrive using blended learning have a lot of support from the school leader. Before they even choose teachers, a lot of the principals that I've worked with, we've sat down and also looked at a school readiness plan, which really speaks to infrastructure. And I think Carrie talked a lot about having hardware, software, space, time, place, thinking about all of those things from a leadership perspective and having that in place for teachers so that they're not troubleshooting on the ground. And I think we also talked a lot about choosing the right teachers for this work. And like Rachel spoke about, the principals and teachers that I've seen really do this well usually come up with some kind of checklist of what am I looking for in a blended learning teacher, and really looking at the teachers that are already doing innovative things in their classrooms so that they're not just recruiting teachers who say, oh yes, I'm interested in blended learning, but I don't know what it is. You know, they'll take teachers like that who are eager and willing to learn, but I've seen more success when principals are recruiting teachers who may already have some knowledge of Web 2.0 tools, some knowledge of online learning management systems, and who are also very creative people who can really, I guess, adapt in the moment. Another thing is, I think Jackie spoke a lot about this, and so did others, but really providing professional development opportunities for teachers, allowing them to go see other teachers doing blended learning. And that kind of brings me back to the lab school model. I think on the ground, when I'm working with teachers, our lab school cohorts have been a wonderful place for sharing best practices, for sharing artifacts, and for actually classroom intervisitations. And Carrie, I believe you spoke a little bit about teachers wanting to know, what does it look like? How can I see this happening in other schools? And one thing I think our lab school model of support has helped is to give teachers, there could be a social studies teacher who is in Queens, and their cohort meets in a school in Manhattan, and we're able to go and have a classroom visit or a few classroom visits and watch different blended learning teachers and how they're doing this in their classrooms, and then actually debriefing as a cohort model and talking about best practices, asking that teacher questions about how they got to that point. How did they get their students to be able to come in, get a device, sit down, log in, and get right to work. Another thing is, Jackie spoke a little bit about creating a committee of key stakeholders. Having that committee meet regularly and look at data and look at the reports from your vendor. I know, we have 15 different vendors, and we've been working this year to really learn how to run reports from each of those vendors and get those analytics and see how students are really doing. And also looking at reports from a teacher's perspective. How often is the teacher logging in? How often is the teacher communicating with students virtually as opposed to the face-to-face classroom? That's something we've really been focusing on as well. And I think referring back to use it to measure progress, connect it to school-wide goals, and create a culture around blended learning. I think where I've seen schools really successful is that the leader of the school he's gotten a few stakeholders that really get into it, and then it's a grassroots feel. It spreads through teachers. They see their colleagues doing things and say, well, I want to be part of that. So I think creating that grassroots movement and having a few key stakeholders who are responsible for the success of the program and who meet regularly to discuss challenges and come up with solutions for those challenges. And one final thing, I know we're over time, is principals or school leaders giving teachers time to experiment with blended learning and giving them the opportunity to have setbacks and not really tie any evaluation to some of those observations of a blended learning classroom, and let that teacher grow as a blended learning educator and give them that time. I think a lot of New York City school teachers are afraid of this new Danielson framework that is being used to evaluate their school year, and I think our leaders need to give teachers who are experimenting with blended learning a little bit of leeway when it comes to that. Jackie, did I miss anything?
No, not
okay. At all. Any questions?
Okay, so I added the 6 elements, and Rob will add that to the slide.
Okay.
Just in terms of the promising practices, it really falls on, a lot of it falls on professional development and just making sure that you're providing the professional development that the schools need. What we do largely is send out professional development on a district level so schools can come to our training sites and they can be trained on particularly the vendor content. What we really stress is the push-in support and having the implementation managers work with the teachers directly so that they can see what implementation looks like at the classroom level. And that has been extremely effective, as well as having schools come together for PD. So if we have schools that have a commonality or a common need, we would group those schools together and provide PD for them. Eileen spoke a lot about the intervisitations. That's been very helpful as well. And also our lab school cohorts, allowing schools to choose where they want to be. And the model schools were chosen because they have particular themes. Some are around homegrown content, some are small middle schools, some are very large comprehensive high schools. And so schools can choose the cohort that they want to be a part of based on the needs and the goals of that cohort. And so just building a community around blended learning has been effective for us because schools really want to learn from each other. Recommendations, if we could, we would say keep your implementation small and build up. It's been very challenging for us every year scaling up the way that we have and we have little support. So 7 implementation managers around 260 schools has been a lot. What we have done this year is scaled back on our implementation strategy. So what we do, we offer schools packages. They have the option to get the basic iLearn package or the plus. The basic meaning that they still have access to all of the trainings, webinars, and they can contact our help desk support and get someone with general questions and answers, and the plus being that we have the implementation managers going into the schools for a fixed number of days and providing that on-site support that I spoke about. And so that's the way that we manage the implementation across all schools, considering that we have 7 implementation managers in 260 schools. So I hope that answers all of your questions. If you have any, I'm going to scroll down. We have a website, and thank you, Eileen.
So I want to thank Jackie and Eileen and Rachel and Carrie for all presenting today. It was great information. It's great to have a variety of programs shared in webinars such as this. As I've mentioned at the beginning of the webinar is being recorded, and I will send out the link as well as this access to the slide deck with Jackie's 6 elements included. If you've got a minute, I appreciate you clicking on that link that's now in the chat room and evaluating this webinar for us. We continue to try to improve everything we do. Also know that we've got future webinars coming up that you can find on our iNACOL webpage. We've got a number of other blended learning type webinars coming up, and then at the end of October we have our iNACOL Blended and Online Learning Symposium that will take place in Florida. So we look forward to seeing you online in the future and hopefully face-to-face at the conference. Thanks everybody for being here today.